Hello, everyone, and welcome to Paranormal Roundtable. I'm your host, Josh Turner, also known as Wolf, and with me tonight is Anthony and...
Oh, now you want me to talk. Okay.
I wasn't going to say because you always do. This guy, dude, noodle-armed guy who's little noodle-armed guy.
Lord Udon, realm of the Mushus.
Oh, my God.
Mr. Noodle of Elmo's World.
Got me there on the... okay, yeah, I was going to let you say it this time because you... Never mind. Who cares? Okay. Anyways, folks, you see what I got to deal with? Do you see it?
Second guessing. You'll never know what I have in mind.
Never know what's going to happen with Mr. Oodle Noodle, whatever you call yourself. Oodle. See, that's what I'm talking about. You keep changing your nickname every week. I don't know what you're called. Like, one week you're Dragon, and the next week you're... Yeah, I don't know what...
I'm Pony Boy going to be next week. I was watching The Outsider, so...
Oh, really? Wow, that's awesome. Well, you're definitely a weirdo outsider. So folks, here's what we got tonight. We got a show, but before that, let's get into some stuff here. Josh Turner at prtpodcast.com. That's my email address. Take it out, check it out. Send me your stories, or you can make friends with me on Facebook because I'm very open to just being friends with people that I know in my real life or that are listeners of the show. When someone sends me a friend request, and I'll tell you what happened the other day. Someone sent me a friend request, and I'm like, do you listen to the show? And they're like, nope. And so I deleted their friend request with no further cause to talk to them, right? And then they messaged me back, and they're like, well, that was rude. And I'm like, look at the way you answered me. And like, nope. Like you had no interest in it at all or even asking what PRT was. And the guy's like, well, what is it? I said, don't worry about it. We have a bunch of mutuals. And then he messages me back and says, oh, yeah, okay. A bunch of people that know you know me, blah, blah, blah. And I said, will you add me as your friend? And I said, nope. And then we just kind of had a laugh about it. And when he laughed, I thought, okay, he's being a good sport. So then I added him and we became cool. And he says, sorry if I came off as rude or whatever. And I didn't know what PRT was. Paranormal Roundtable, explain it. Yeah, okay. I obviously didn't really watch a show because we call it PRT. So that's how I know. If I say, you listen to PRT, then I know. But it would make it much easier if you would just send me a friend request and just say, hey, I listened to the show. So do me that courtesy and I'll prove you. Also, I am on Instagram as Josh Turner 940 on Instagram, and go and hit me up on Instagram. We can be friends there too. We can hang out. Tony?
PRT Mushi on Instagram. I have the same handle on Facebook. I also have my regular personal account that I have on Facebook. You can friend me on any of those, and I don't have any friends, so just go ahead. I'll accept you no matter what.
Jeez, that's pretty desperate. He's like, okay,
I'm lonely. Help me.
So that being said, that's Tony's information. That's my information. Now we do still have tickets left for the conference. The ticket sales have picked up quite a bit, so I'm actually happy about that. But the tickets are it's on Eventbrite. You go to Eventbrite, and it is listed under Paranormal Roundtable Presents Second Annual Dogman Cryptid Conference. Okay. So go to Paranormal Roundtable Presents Second Annual Dogman Cryptid Conference and get your tickets, and please show up over in Fort Worth to meet us and hang out with us. Bunch of great people are going to be there. Too many people to list right here, and because it'll eat too far into the show. But we also have a Facebook group, and if you go to the group after the show, we always drop the link on there, and when it says on there, official link, if you leave a comment on there, guess what? You could win a prize, which is an autographed book or who knows what, but typically an autographed book from one of many authors like Nick Redfern, Ken Gerhard, Lyle Blackburn, Barton Nunley, or David Weatherly. So go over there and go and like and subscribe to the show, please. And don't forget to join the Paranormal Roundtable Facebook group, be a part of the Paranormal Roundtable Facebook family. Nellie has a show also called Paranormal Lounge. Join that. And then in Humanoids with Barton Nunley, I'm an admin in that. And then we also have a Paranormal Prayer Group. Don't forget about that. So if you need prayers, requests, or anything like that, you can go. And if you're not a person that believes in God or Christ, whatever, you need somebody to pray for you and you feel like you're in need, okay? Just, we don't push people away. Here's the thing. We got to say this, and I have to say this, the Friday live stream and then a Sunday live stream we do now, really want you to show up. If you're only listening to the show on the podcast form on Spotify, which seems to be very popular, we do like you listening to Spotify, but we got to get you to go to live stream because you're missing out on a ton of content. and you can interact if you show up when it's live in the live chat. Now, if you miss that, don't worry. You can always go and listen to the archives, and you can go back and listen to that show. And then or whatever episode you wanted, there's a ton of content on there. Just go back and listen.
You're really missing out about like 2/3 of content that we produce on YouTube exclusively. I mean, we do the podcast and obviously put them out on every platform, but really a lot of the content is going to be on those lives. And another thing we have is the Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/PRT podcast. We have a $10, $20, and $30 tier. The $20 and $30 tier is if you sign up for those, then you get a swag bag immediately. And the $10 tier, if you sign up for that for about 3 months, then you'll get your swag bag. And we try to give them out, and we try to give you guys something for helping us out. And it means a lot to us, so we try to give you something so it means a lot to you as well.
Yeah. And so don't forget, in each swag bag is the $20 and the $10 are the same, except it takes 3 months to get the $10 one. You get automatic on the $20 tier. $30 tier, you get a super swag.
And if you can't find it, or if I said it and you couldn't hear it, then you're always going to find everything you need in the description of every YouTube video. Anthony works really hard to make sure that they're always in there.
And if you go to Patreon, and what is it? Patreon.com/PRT podcast.
Yep, got it.
Yeah. So you go to that Patreon, sign up, and then you automatically get it. You don't have to wait. Once you've paid the $30, whatever, and you can cancel at any time, and you get your swag, because we want you to wear our merchandise. We want you to wear that hoodie. We want you to wear that shirt and drink out of that tumbler and use it, and the stickers and everything you get, and the books that we send you. Mm-hmm. We want you to read them. Those are our friends. Look, here's the thing. If you join that, even like right now today, you go join that or whatever, you'll be on your way to having that swag. But what you got to do is send me a message on Patreon, through Patreon, saying, hey, look, Bozo, I'm a $30 tier now. You need to send me my stuff. It's my stuff and I want it now. And so if you do that, send the message on Patreon. I'll respond, and then give me your address and your shirt size. That's very important. People keep forgetting to do that. And then I got to go follow up with them, and then it becomes a big whatever. So that being said, thank you for being here. We're going to get started. We're going to talk about some Dogman tonight. So let me get started with the first episode, first story. Now, this one I was kind of excited about, and because this one came from a security guard, and it happened to two different security guards. And I've interviewed them both, and I thought, and one of them, he doesn't speak really good English. He's from the Middle East, and the other guy kind of declined to come on. He's an older gentleman and didn't really know how he'd feel, if he'd feel comfortable coming on telling the story. I really wanted him to tell the story to you himself, but I'm the second best thing, so I can get it done. Here's what happened. Now, we've discussed ghosts and other things and werewolf-type creatures, dogman, whatever, on construction sites. We worked on construction sites, and that's how we got some of the stories that we got, and one of the most famous being the Hernandez Ranch episodes. Those guys gave us all kinds of information, and it came from working with them at a construction site. Well, I got this one through a friend of mine who said, hey, I know you work security, and I got a guy who needs a job. Well, I talked to this guy, and this actually happened down in Houston, and this guy, the money wasn't, where he wanted it to be to come and relocate, to come over here and work. So I said, that's fine. And this actually happened out in Katy. You know where Katy's at? Right outside of Houston?
Yes. Yeah.
Off of I-10. Yeah, they were building a subdivision out there a couple of years ago. And this individual, he said, dude, not only did this happen to me, but it happened to a friend of mine. And his friend's from Jordan, and his friend told me some crazy stuff too. I thought he spoke good enough English to come on the show, but just like our friend from El Salvador, he didn't really feel comfortable because they feel self-conscious about the way they talk. But I think
it's the accent.
I think he sounds fine. Like Phil Stern from Germany is the same thing. It's like whatever. But anyway, what happened to these guys would scare the crap out of anybody it happened to. Like, it would happen to me. What I saw when I was 15, it was scary, but it was kind of at a distance. And then there was a fence between us at one point, and like, this was terrifying. I would say this is right up there on par with what happened to this guard, or it wasn't a guard, actually. It was a guy that worked for the LCRA years and years ago. This guy gave me a story, and he was doing his checks at a water treatment plant. and this creature like was right there in front of him, but he was armed. So being a guy who's armed, this guy in this particular scenario was not. And he was out on the edge of town. Now, I had actually read something like in a newspaper article or was a news feed or something that I'd read about somebody seeing a werewolf-looking creature right outside of Katy, Texas, which is right outside of Houston. And I didn't realize that it was like a flap that was going on right there by that subdivision that was already built next to this one where this guy was working. And it was in the same year. But I don't quote me. I think it was a few years ago. It was like 2018. It was before the pandemic. And I remember just kind of hearing about it in passing and somebody saying, hey, have you heard about these people seeing these creatures? And I actually interviewed somebody that I might have put on the show already that saw something very similar. But what happened to this guy, though, was that he was sitting at a construction site and they were roommates, these two guys, and they shared a car. So the one guy had to drive the other guy to work. He'd drop him off. And we know how that is. And Tony, one time you had to do that at Harris Ridge when you didn't have a car. And it's kind of creepy because if you're sitting there in a chair and you're at a construction site and something happens, man, you're just at the mercy of whatever, I like to, if it's me, I'd like to sometimes take my chair and sit outside of my truck, because it gets kind of hot, especially in the summertime. But then at some point I get back in my truck because sometimes I get creeped out, especially knowing what I know about what's out there.
You just feel kind of exposed and open.
Well, that's what happened to this guy.
Like a sitting duck.
Yeah.
Especially, look, construction sites for security guards, at least for me personally, I feel like are some of the best sites for this specific reason of being very quiet and peaceful. It's like you're not going to see a lot of people or see a lot of things out there because they're usually in areas that don't have a lot of people out there. But it's also for that reason that a lot of weird stuff happens out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you see weird stuff. And that place where you were at, just real quick, and this was kind of a spooky thing. Me and Nellie were working that site together one night, the place that you were at, sitting by yourself out there in Pflugerville. And we saw something walk in one of those houses. It was a very large, which I think was a coy wolf. And it didn't come back out. It walked into the house because the garage door was open and the back door was open and we were using it to go to the bathroom. So I eventually had to go in there and Nellie wanted to go with me and try to tag along. And I kept telling her no. And I went in there and I searched high and low and I kept thinking that I was going to have to confront this animal and it wasn't in there. I don't know where it went. The back door was closed. I don't know where it went.
I was just going to ask, do you think it went out the back?
No, it was weird. It was a weird thing. The place was full of skunks.
Mm-hmm.
So I can imagine, sitting out there. That was one of the things that Scorpion complained about was the skunks would walk up to him. Yeah, and one of them walked right up to him. But this guard that was over there in Katy, what happened was a very similar thing. He was sitting out there in front of one of the houses because they were all in the early stages of the construction. No electricity, nothing. So, gosh, dude, that's the worst because you don't even have you definitely don't have internet, and all you have is your phone, and he had nowhere to plug it into. So, of course, about 3 o'clock in the morning, his phone goes dead because he was sitting there the first night he was there. He was looking at his phone. Phone goes dead. He starts hearing this howling in the distance. Now, the howling by itself is not necessarily like, oh, okay, it could be coyotes, and maybe they're here in Texas, though, we have really big coyotes. So he was kind of freaked out. And so he kind of got scared. So he moved himself inside of one of the houses, but there were no doors. It was just basically like, the wood, the frame. I mean, so he's sitting there by some lumber and he said, man, I had nothing to defend myself with, but like a big, 2x4. And he says, so I just sitting there and I hear this howling and it keeps getting closer and closer and closer. He goes, till finally it sounded like it was just on the other side of the site. And he goes, dude, I was terrified. He goes, and I needed to go and do my rounds and walk around, and check these houses. He said there were about half a dozen that were already framed up and the rest were just slabs. And he said that they had already had lots of theft, which they'll rob you blind. And he was sitting there and he was like, dude, I heard this howling and I couldn't get it out of my head that this just did not sound natural. But nothing happened though, and he's like, my phone's dead. So the next night he came, he made sure not to play around on his phone too much. But even then, about 4:30, the phone was dead. And he's like, and I didn't have a really good phone. So He goes, the first week was like that, And he goes, the howling noise just kept happening. And he goes, he kept telling his friend, like, because his friend worked at a construction site that was across the highway from him. So he'd go by and check on him, bring him food, stuff like that. And he said, dude, I told my friend, I said, dude, I can't sit out here without a weapon or something, And he goes, well, okay, he goes, you're not commissioned. You can't, carry a weapon, a gun anyway. But he said, he goes, I didn't care. I was to the point where I was like, I didn't care. I was scared, But he brought a machete and he kept it by him because he thought that there was something out there. And he kept telling his friend's like, you're crazy, dude. You're just tripping. What are you talking about? And so he said, dude, there's something out here. I keep hearing like this howling every night and something is moving through this property. Gets worse. Okay. The construction superintendent asked him if he knew anything about a giant pile of feces that was laid out on top of one of the piles of wood. And he's like, no. He goes, well, somebody or something took a humongous poop on there, and he said it smelled terrible. And he goes to take a look, and he sees it. And he's like, it was really weird. He goes like, I'm over here like inspecting this poop, And he goes, I look at it, I'm thinking, there's no way a human being made this much poop. He goes, in a coyote, it's not really big enough to make that much poop. And it wouldn't, he goes, I don't know. It was just weird. And he said that it added to the fear level. And he's at this point in his wildest dreams, he would never have dreamed what it ended up being. And so he said that he was scared already. So he went after he finally got paid. He took an advance and he got one of those charging blocks at his friend's behest. Said, hey, so your phone won't go dead, right? So he's sitting there, pitch black one night, and he's got his flashlight. And he hears something moving around and he shines the light in the direction and he sees this black furry thing. That's how he described it. Like just going across the field and going from behind one house to another. He stands up and he's like, he grabs the machete. He goes, I look down, my hand is shaking. He's like, and I'm like, I'm about to call the police. He goes, and so then I sit back down and I dialed 911 and he goes, I didn't know what to tell him. And he goes, I think I have an intruder on the property. So the police showed up. They asked him if anything was going on, whatever. And he told them, he said, I thought I saw something, but, some guy, he just said it was a guy. He didn't say, hey, I saw a werewolf, or whatever. Because at that point, he said it looked like a freaking werewolf. He said the upper body looked like it was down on all fours, but it looked weird. It looked like the rump was up too high and the shoulders were too low. Like if a man was crawling around, and he goes, maybe it's a guy in a costume. But he goes, then I put two and two together and I heard the howling noise. So he told his roommate, Sam, he said, look, I don't want to work here anymore. Let's switch sites. And Sam had the vehicle and he says, okay. He goes, but you got to use the vehicle at the other side because it's so much bigger. It was an apartment complex. So he had to drive it. So he says, okay, use the vehicle and you go sit over there. And his roommate's like, good, fine. I'm not scared, whatever. So this guy goes over there, Sam, and he sits there. The very first night he was there, he said, I hear the howling noise. He goes, oh yeah. He goes, and then I realized that Adam's not his real name, but he said, his name starts with an A, but he said, Adam was right. There's something out here. And he's like, dude, the next morning we're comparing notes. And I'm like, look, I heard it at this time, blah, blah, blah. He said it was about 2:40 in the morning and it went on to about 3:30. And he says, I told you, man, there's something out there. Well, this guy, he's actually commissioned. So he had a pistol, and the other guy said if he had the money, he would have just taken one anyway, but he didn't, he's broke. And they were happy just to have jobs, you know what I mean? And so it was kind of like they were just happy to be getting a paycheck. So they had to tough it out. And it was, you can make a lot of hours and make a lot of money working construction sites real quick. You guys know that. So this guy was like, he was happy to be working. But he said, I don't like this situation where one of us has to be out there and exposed. But he said another week went by. He heard the howling noise. He saw stuff moving around, but he didn't get a good look at it. So he thought, there's no danger here. Whatever this is, it's harmless. It's not going to mess with you. So, boy, he was like, dude, I could not be more wrong. He did not realize this thing was going to mess with him in a big way. He said, I get to work. I go over, and at this point, a couple weeks after they had started working there or whatever, or a couple weeks after he had started doing the site, hearing the noises and doing and all the weird stuff, And he said that I decided I needed to get a vehicle, So he goes, I was just waiting until payday, and I was going to go and I'd already been approved, so I was going to go and put money down and get a vehicle. He's like, I had about 3 days left before I got it. So I figured, you know what? I'll just tough it out, man. So his boss asked him on his day off if he could cover a couple shifts over there because they had a guy that worked there on the weekends who had a vehicle. Well, that guy, there was a scheduling mix-up, so that guy shows up. And this guy tells him, oh, I thought I was supposed to be here. He goes, oh, no, I'm here. And he goes, well, okay. And he's like, you work here without a vehicle? And he says, yeah. And this guy that's in the vehicle has this big old shotgun and a pistol. He goes, well, I hope you got some weaponry out here because there's something out here. And I'm not joking, man. And he goes, even the superintendents know it too because they found poop and stuff, and it looks like, he says, and it looks almost like a bear. And the dude goes, really? And he said, from the one glimpse he had of it, he just thought it would look like a wolf or something, And he goes, I thought I saw it one time, but it looked like a wolf. And he goes, well, I don't know. He goes, if I had to be real honest with you, it looks like a dang werewolf. He's like, but I know werewolves don't exist, right? And so he's just kind of laughed. And then they kind of started talking about other stuff, and then the guy drove off. Well, that obviously didn't make him feel any better about his situation because he's like, dude, I'm sitting here at this construction site, and I have nowhere to get. If something happens, I am boned completely. So he goes into the back of one of the houses about 2 a.m. to use the restroom, and he says, I'm sitting there, and I hear a growl. And he goes, and I'm not going to lie, I was doing number one off the back porch, of this property. And I look over and I see something move, move to my left. And it moved like sideways to its left. And he's like, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's something in this backyard with me. And he said, then it began to move toward me kind of slowly. He goes, and I had my flashlight and my hand was shaking. He goes, I was like, I wanted to shine the light on it. He's like, but I knew that when I illuminated whatever this was, I'm going to see exactly what it is. It's going to terrify me and I'm probably going to faint or this thing is going to, react badly. So he goes, I didn't even turn the flashlight on. He goes, I just backed out slowly. And that thing just kept growling and growling. And then it growled really loud. He goes, and have you ever felt, this is what he told me. He's like, have you ever felt a growl that went right through you into your chest and it kind of rattled your organs? And I said, I think so. One time, like at the zoo, I thought I heard, like one of those big cats, But as a child, I was young, you don't really think of what they call infrasound, right? And so when this happened, he goes, dude, I had my pistol right there on my hip, but I was too scared to even lift it. He's like, I walked backwards all the way through that house, bumping into like lumber. And then I see it and it's going up onto the porch and it's starting to go toward the door. And he goes, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And he goes, so I pulled out my phone. He goes, and at first he goes, I thought I'm going to call the police. He's like, but I remember, Adam trying to do that. And what is he going to tell him? He's like, he said. So he said, well, the first thing he did, he called Adam. He said, dude, get over here now. Because he was about, 10 minutes away. He said, just in the middle of the night, it was like a 10-minute drive. He said, just get over here now. Come on, bring me the truck. Get me out of here. Then he called the police. Police come out there. He's been out hiding in another house across the street watching that house the whole time. Didn't see him come out anywhere. So he figured he was probably this creature, he or she, whatever it was walking around the behind the properties, right? And he said that there was like this, the poles for the fence line. It wasn't a fence yet. It was just like poles or whatever.
Outline.
Yeah. They started putting the poles and whatever. And he said that he thought he saw something standing by one of the poles and he couldn't tell, but it was like, he thought it was peeking around the corner looking at him. The police come. As soon as the police car starts to turn into where he's at, they got there unusually quick. They were right there in the area. And that thing like just darted like real quick. He saw it run and he said that had to be it right there. He saw like a shadow. And then his friend showed up right at the same time about the time the police were showing up. And so then he tells him, he said, I thought I had an intruder. I saw a man. So the cop gets out and he starts walking around, goes to the back. They all go together. whatever. And then the police officers said something really weird to him. He said, can you give me a description of the suspect? And he didn't know what to say because the thing was black. And he goes, well, it was black. And he said, wait a minute, it was black? And the police officer says, is this a person? Or are we talking about something else? He goes, just be honest with me. I can take it. And his friend, Adam, just blurts out, it looks like a werewolf. And at first the cop, they thought, oh my gosh. And he says, dude, this cop's going to start laughing. And he's going to think we're off our rockers, you know?
Yeah, and next time you call him when you really need him, he's not going to show up.
They're not going to show up. And he goes, but he said this cop pulled his gun out and says, okay. He goes, all right. So he goes, you got your weapon? And the other guy, he says, yeah. And his friend who had just taken his commission class was already taking liberties, you know, and was like, they were, you know, he just assumed he was whatever. So they're walking around with weapons, you know, their weapons drawn. And the police officer says, I'm going to need backup. So he calls for another police officer. That police officer took a while to show up. So they had already swept the property and gone back out by the time that guy showed up. And then they were talking and he heard the police. This is what he told me. He said he heard the police officer telling the other one saying, yeah, I think it's the same thing. And so he tells Adam, he said, did you hear them? They're talking. They know about this thing. They know that this thing is, you know, whatever. So the cops go back over to them. I said, look, guys, the best thing you could do is probably not be out here without a vehicle. Right. He goes, there's been some missing pets in the area and a previously built subdivision. They've seen some things. There's been trash cans knocked over. We don't know what we're dealing with exactly. We think it might be a black bear. And he goes, brother, this is not a black bear. It's like, this is something else. And then the other cop was nodding his head kind of in agreement going, yeah, but we're calling it a black bear. So that's, you know, kind of how that went down. So then they leave and then he tells his friend, he goes, well, I you know, one of us has to go back and do the other property. And his friend's like, well, I'm not staying here. I'm not doing this. I'm not saying, you know, and he goes, well, it's my truck. I should be allowed to, you know, whatever. So he says, you know, they rock, paper, scissors, you know, kind of like just decided who was going to whatever. And he lost. So he had to stay there. So another hour goes by and he didn't see anything at that point. He was just unnerved. So he calls his friend and he says, I just can't stay here. I cannot. You got to come get me. I can't be here. This is not happening. This is too much for me. It's making my head want to explode. Because he goes, at that point, I thought maybe I was hallucinating because I kept seeing it everywhere and I knew that wasn't correct. I'd blink my eyes and it was gone. And so the next day they were eating at some like Chick-fil-A or something. And one of the managers was there and he said, what do y'all do? He said, oh, we work security over there in these, you know, and he says, oh man, I wouldn't work over there, dude. He's like, my friend lives over there. He said, there's a freaking werewolf running around out there or something that looks like one, you know? And then he goes, they look at each other and they're like, actually, so they started talking to this guy about it. Well, this guy at Chick-fil-A, he's like a big devout Christian guy, whatever. And he said, dude, he goes, years ago, my wife was driving home and she broke down right there in that area. And he's like, and when my son, who's now an adult, you know, was just a teenager, he had to go and pick her up. And he wasn't a very good driver, whatever. And he ended up running off the road because he saw something dart out in front of his vehicle that looked like a freaking werewolf. Like a black, large werewolf. And when he described what his son saw and what his friend claimed, this Chick-fil-A manager's friend claimed to see, they're identical. So it's like the same thing, right? So he said, dude, it was crazy. So what ended up happening, the next day he called in sick because he just could not bear to go there again. And then, like I said, he only had to have another day and he was going to get a truck. So then the day comes, he goes and he gets his truck. Now they each have vehicles. He has a vehicle and his friend has a vehicle. He sells his other truck to his roommate. And like I said, they're really close, whatever. And so Adam is working at the other site that requires a vehicle. And you guys know about that. Sometimes these apartment complexes, you got to have a vehicle. And then he's on the other side and he's in his vehicle. Well, he has to use the bathroom. And he's like, I'm not using the bathroom here. I'm not going in the Porta Johns he's too afraid. So he turns to go drive out. And this thing is standing right there in front of his truck. And he said, at this point, I got a good look at this thing, like full-bodied everything. He goes, I looked at it. It was snarling, growling, and there was like saliva dripping from its mouth. And he said, dude, and I was sitting there staring at this thing, and I look over, and the scariest part about it was I was sitting there, he goes, and I had my window open because it was hot, you know? And he said, dude, I thought I was safe. I had my gun and everything, and I had like, you know, a vest on, and I was like, he goes, I was ready, you know? He goes, and I looked over, and there was a freshly killed deer laying right there. And he goes, how did I not see that? How did I not hear that? He goes, there's so many questions going on in my head, and then I'm freaking out, and I'm faced with the reality that this thing, I'm looking dead on at it, and my lights are illuminating it. He said the eyes were glowing yellow. He said, and they were literally, it looked like the eyes were changing from yellow to orange. And he's like, and I'm sitting there looking at this thing, and he goes, dude, all the blood was rushing from my head. Like, it was just, he said, I thought I was going to go unconscious. He said, and I didn't know what to do. Should I back up or, you know, or just gun it? I didn't know what to do. And he said, when this thing put its hand, he said, yes, hand on the hood and just kind of pulled its hand back and made a scraping noise on the top of his truck. Now, this wasn't a big fancy truck. It was an F-150, an older model F-150 or whatever. And it was kind of beat up, but he needed a vehicle, you know? And he goes, dude, I was freaking terrified, man. He goes, and I didn't, at that point, hadn't looked down at its legs or anything like that. I'd only caught glimpses of it. And he had a humongous snout, very wolf-like head, big, tall ears. Everything about it was screaming werewolf, you know? And he said that I backed up and just this thing stood there in the road and then kind of turned. And then he goes, that's when I saw like the backward bent legs or whatever. He described the legs to me, and that's what, you know, what he told me was these weird dog-like legs. And they just kind of walked back over to where that deer was, and it grabbed it and started dragging it off, and then kind of lifted it up under its arm. And he said that deer was a humongous buck, which probably, you know, he had just killed it. It looked fresh, like it was dripping blood, like, you know what I mean?
He probably lucked out that he saw this thing right after it killed a deer, because he might have been on the menu.
Yeah.
You know,
he's lucky he didn't try to pull him out of his truck.
Yeah.
Well, long story short, at this point, that was it. He told his supervisor, he said, I'm not working there. I don't give a crap. And then the guy, he goes into his boss's office and he tells him what happened. And the boss kind of leans back in his chair. He goes, dude, I'll never forget. He just kind of leaned back in his chair and goes, huh? He's like, you're the only one that's been able to stay there. He's like, the other guys, I've gone through 3 guys. And he goes, really? Because he didn't really know who was working opposite of him. He thought it was the same guy. It was some guy named Cole or something. And then he goes, there was another guy he thought that was taking his place, but he wasn't sure. And he's like, dude, yeah, I've gone through 3 other guards that, you know, that they just won't work there. And they had him at that point doing 5 nights a week. And he was like, I don't know what to tell you. I can't work there.
That's kind of funny that as soon as he gets his truck, it becomes unsafe for him.
Yeah, I mean, but you know, think about it. What's really scary about this is, imagine if you were swimming out in the ocean every day for a week, you know, or a month or whatever, and then you always go to the same spot and you swim, and then one day somebody reels in like, you know, a 14-foot tiger shark, you know, and it's right there where you were always swimming, you know what I mean? And you thought you saw something, but you weren't real sure or whatever. I mean, these things are land sharks. And so, you know, imagine you're just sitting there and for days, you know, him and his friend, you know, but he said there was a lot of wildlife that, you know, that come through, that he saw hogs and he saw, you know, deer. So this thing, you know, if it's being a flesh and blood creature, you know, whatever, you know, and I'll say this, like Linda Godfrey said, you know, they stay in our plane of existence. They have to be flesh and blood. So whether you believe they're flesh and blood all the time or they're not, doesn't really matter. They do things like flesh and blood creatures. This thing was probably killing and eating animals, but by the grace of God, it didn't kill or eat them. I mean, you know, and I think that it probably would have. That one night it was coming into the house and going after him, and he ran across the street because multiple times he said he saw blood in different spots, and the superintendent saw it too. And they were like, he told him, he's just got a predator out here or something, you know, that's been killing things. And, you know, then the neighborhood, down the road or whatever that was already built by the same people, they had pets and things going missing. So this thing obviously is a carnivore. It's killing and eating. We don't know that he would have been, killed or eaten, but it's highly likely he could have gone missing, because a lot of times people go missing, but anyway, that's that story. I mean, just the thought that thing was there, it really was there the whole time, and they were actually just exposed, to it, That's a scary thing. I mean, a very scary thing. I mean, I think about that sometimes with the guards that don't have vehicles. I like to where they can go and get up on like an apartment complex. They can sit up on a perch, where something can't really get to them the way that, you were down on the ground.
Up high, at least.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's a little more protection. You can maybe fight it off or something, I think. Maybe. I don't know. I do worry about my guards, not just for that, but all the other crazy stuff that goes on. People getting shot at and lately, and people getting knives threatened with them, whatever.
Things getting stolen, and people getting big rocks hurled at them by homeless people. It's gotten bad, really bad. Not gonna lie, but you don't think of werewolves as that's the least of your worries. Really, is werewolves, but they're there. I mean, they are there. And this guy said, "Look, this is what happened to me. This is true." And here's another one. I got to know. We'll move to the next one. So this next story comes out of a place called Morelia, and it's down in Mexico. And to give you some idea of where this place is at, it's actually west of Mexico City and southeast of Guadalajara. Those are the bigger cities. They're bigger cities around that, like more well known, I guess. What's funny about Morelia is that the people that own a Mexican restaurant called Morelia. Actually, that used to be one of our favorite places, but they're not here in Austin anymore. The pandemic kind of destroyed it, unfortunately. But really good food, good, all these different types of fajitas, great place. Can't say enough about it. But anyway, the point is they're not here, but they're still out in Elgin. And I always wondered where that name came from. Well, one day I was in there eating, and this was years ago. Back before the pandemic, and one of the guys, and if y'all remember this conversation, it was when we ate dinner with a guy named Ernest. Yeah. And that dinner was very pivotal because from him, we ended up getting a bunch of stories and a bunch of other stuff happened, and it just went on and on. But the waiter that was there, that waited on us, I don't know if you remember him, but he said that his family was the one that owned it, and they were from Morelia, and he was one of the assistant managers there. He was a younger guy. He was real good friends with the. I'm sorry. He was dating the owner's daughter, whatever. And so anyway, the owner's, he was real good friends with him. He was assistant manager. And so I ended up getting a story, and this guy reached out to me out of nowhere. It was out of the blue, just a couple of weeks ago. And he told me, he's like, "I like your show, and I've been watching it for a couple of years now. It was turned on to me." By this person, I don't know if I should say his name, but the guy that gave us, I think his name was Mario or something like that. But anyway, the waiter told him, and then one thing led to another, and so they started watching the show. And everybody knows if you listen to the show, all it takes is once. And if you are not just completely mental, you'll love it. And like I said before, we're very humble people. But anyway, he tells me, he's like, "I got a story." He said, "This happened to my abuelito." That's his grandfather. And he said this happened down in Mexico, where we were from. So this was actually, I think he said, about 20 miles south of Morelia, which was like, it's kind of like I said, down in the bottom of Mexico, but kind of in the interior. And he said that it was a crazy story that was like a family folk tale or whatever. But one day he asked his grandfather, after listening to my show and listening to several episodes, he said, "Dude, I wanted to," and I guess he had reached out to Sal, but unfortunately Sal had passed away already. But he said that his grandfather said that this was absolutely true. This was not a myth. This was no folk tale that they just family story. They like to make up stories, whatever. He said, "Nope." He said, "This happened to my dad." Okay, so that would have been this guy's great-grandfather. And he said that his dad was in the military for a long time, and he retired. And so all he would do is just sit around and whittle, outside and chew tobacco and then complain.
So that's all he did. He just complained about the politics, about everything. And I go over there and visit him, and all he would do is complain. And he said that, his grandfather said, he goes, my dad was just the biggest complainer about everything. And that's all he did. He lived to be 97 years old. And he was always whittling. That was his thing, And he said that one day he tells him, he says, man, he goes, I like sleeping outside. I wish I could sleep outside still. And he says, well, why can't you? I mean, why is that? Why don't you? Because he says, you remember when we were a kid and we lived in this other place, they had, and he said, we had that screened in porch. And he said, yeah, I remember. I loved that house when I was a kid. He goes, well, one night when I was there, he's like, a werewolf attacked me. I mean, just point blank said it like that to this guy. And so his son, his dad, whose name was Daniel. And so Daniel, he goes, what are you talking about? Dad, what are you talking about? And he goes, yeah. He's like, ay, baracho teresos. This guy, he's drinking, and he's like, you drink, you go out to drink tequila. He says, have you seen me drinking? He goes, and he's like, yeah, I have. He goes, okay, I was. He goes, but doesn't change the fact that it happened. And he's like, but were you drunk? Baracho, He told him, no, man, no. He said, dude, I was, sitting there, on the porch. He goes, and I fell asleep. And he goes, and I hear this growling like noise, and I was sniffing, whatever. And he wakes up, and he sees this thing, like literally leering at him, standing over him. And he said it was brownish red. He'll never forget that by the light of the moon, he could see it. And he's like, I look up at it. He goes, and I fell asleep. I had my knife in my hand. And he told him, he says, have you ever wondered where I got the scar on my shoulder? He says, yeah, you got it from the war in the army, whatever. He goes, no, that's not what happened. He told him that, something had blown up by him, and that's why he had that. He goes, no, I got attacked by a werewolf. And he's like, come on, mentiras. He said, no. He's like, you're not listening to me. He goes, dude, I want to tell you this. This is real. He's like, because his job, he was kind of like working for a park ranger service, whatever. This is the guy that told me the story. That's his grandfather, Daniel. So Daniel's dad is the one that this happened to. So that would be this guy that told me.
So Daniel's working in.
Yeah, he's working in the forestry industry, whatever, working like out in the sticks, whatever. He said, I'm worried about you, son, because you're out there working and these things are out there. He said, come on, man, you're kidding. He goes, stop playing around. He said he was starting to get aggravated with his son because he wasn't listening. This is the story that his grandfather told him. He said, my dad started getting aggravated. He said, I don't want you going out there into the woods, and out in the middle of nowhere, or out in the desert, whatever. He's like, these creatures are out there. They're everywhere. He said, one time, he goes, when I was in the military, he says, we saw one. He goes, clear as day. It walked right out in front of me and my whole unit. And we all just opened fire and we shot it and it fell. Probably hit it, 18 times. He said, dude, but it got up and it just took off. Bleeding, from all the holes. It was bleeding. It was blood. And he said that when I woke up that night, he goes, I remember it was a warm spring night. He goes, I look up and this thing is looming over me. And he goes, and I'm looking at it. And he goes, I recognized that thing. He's like, I thought this has to be the same thing I shot years ago. He said it probably was about over 20 years before. And he said, but it didn't make sense because the one that I shot was black and this one was reddish brown. He goes, but I got this weird feeling that it was like it knew me. And so he thought, I'm either just really unlucky to have run into this thing twice, or it's the same thing. And I'll tell you what his theory was on this in a minute. He said he just instinctively, he grabbed that knife and he just stabbed at it because it was looming over him. And he goes, I got this impression that it was going to kill me. And so his son Daniel says, why do you think it was going to kill you? He goes, because it was showing me images like from my mind, his mind to my mind. He's like, I think there was like a link and it was telling me like, I'm going to eat you, like I'm going to kill you. He goes, but it didn't speak with words. It was like images. And he goes, right when it opened its mouth, I stabbed it right in its chest. He goes, and I had a pretty big knife that I was using to whittle. And usually, he goes, it's by the grace of God. He said it was weird. I had a smaller knife that I would sit there and use. He's like, and that day I used a big old knife, that was not the normal knife that I used. It was 3 times the size of my whittling knife because I couldn't find it because my wife had moved it from the drawer into the sewing drawer by accident when she was cleaning. So it's really weird how that happens, He said right then this thing had just opened its mouth and clamped down on his shoulder and lifted him up out of his chair and tossed him through the screen out into the yard with just its head. He said then it just jumped out through the screen. It was walking on 2 legs and kind of slowly walking around me. And he goes, and I grabbed that knife. He goes, I still had it in my hand. He said, and I just plunged it into its foot. Its weird pawed looking foot. And he said, when I did this, it made this weird noise. It sounded like 5 or 6 different people yelling at one time. And he said it was the most ungodly thing he'd ever heard in his life. He said it was terrible. It was like demonic. And he goes, and when I did, blood came out of its foot, but also this white, sort of weird looking, acidy looking stuff. And he said that the reason he said that is because the next day he went back and where that blood and that white stuff had hit the ground, it had like killed the grass. And he said that this thing just took off running into the woods and, or into the night, whatever, the brush. And he said it was terrifying. And he said, he goes, I laid there in the yard and I limped back inside. And he goes, and I don't, I don't like doctors. I don't go to doctors, whatever. But he goes, my wife's like, we got to take you to the doctor, whatever. And so they got in, whatever, and they went and they went to the doctor, and the doctor's like, what did this? And he said it was looked like a dog bite. And the doctor, he said it was a dog. The doctor said, that's a dog. That's the biggest dog bite I've ever seen in my life, dude. It literally tore like several of his muscles in there and tore his shoulder up real bad to where the rest of his life, his shoulder like had about half of its strength. And he said his grandfather told him that his dad was a very strong man. And that after that, he just wasn't, And so he just remembers being a little kid and his dad saying that he had to go to the doctor because a dog bit him. Well, years later, as he got older, he said, dude, he saw the scar and he told his dad, he goes, how did that happen? And his dad said, I got that in the war. He said, I don't remember like my dad like walking around with his shirt off that often, And he goes, I was kind of confused because I was like, I thought a dog bit him. And he said, well, he said, Dad, I thought a dog attacked you or something. And he said, no, I got that in the war. That dog bite, it didn't do anything. It was just, it healed. So he goes, oh, okay. So he's like, like a kid, you don't think nothing of it. You just go, okay. But this guy just told him that. And then he grabbed him by his arm and he said, look, the truth be told, he goes, I lied to you. He goes, this thing actually attacked me. He's like, your mother knows the truth. So he says, okay. So he played it off. A couple days later, he goes and he's driving to the store and he asks his mom, he's like, is this true? What is this he's telling me? And his mother, who he said was a notoriously bad driver, and back then all the cars were rack and pinion steering, and you weren't like, he goes, she had to really concentrate on driving, And he's telling his grandson the story, and he said, and your grandmother was not a good driver, your great grandmother. And so I was pestering her. So she says, look, if he said it, it's true, it's true. She didn't really want to get into it. And she claimed that it was something that he had attacked, that they had attacked when they were in the military. But the crazy thing was his grandfather went to him and he said, dude, you've told me that you saw it twice, but it's 2 different colors. And what his grandfather told him was very interesting to me. He said that he had a friend that he was in the military with that said that these things are like a hive. And those that in that area where they were at, they all live underground, right? And he goes, and they all, if one of them sees something, they all see it. And that their military had actually captured a couple of these things and were able to communicate with them like through, and he didn't know the word, and so he said, through their mind, And he said, okay, so it's telepathy, And I said, yeah, that's the word, He said, yeah, my grandfather didn't know what the word was in English. He said, but they spoke through the mind, and they told him, like, one of us gets hurt, we all know it. If you hurt one of us, we all, whatever. So they were like a hive, these things. So that's why he said it was the same one, even though they're different bodies, they were all just like of one mind. I thought that was interesting that he pointed that out to me, because I've wondered that about some of these creatures, about how people say, I'll see different ones. And we got that with the Hernandez stories, It was like they were all like one big angry hive, that was, and it's a pack. I get it. But I think it goes beyond like a wolf pack. I don't think wolves are really mentally, they're not using telepathy. But these creatures seem to be able to do that. And so I thought that was crazy. I thought, it opens up a whole nother level on these things of what they could be or what they are. And so you take that story, and then he said his grandfather told him that years later, after his great-grandfather died, which was his grandfather's dad, he said after years later, he goes, I was out in the brush, and I was working. At that point, he was working as a game warden. It's like being a game warden here, but they stop people from killing and stuff, animals and stuff. And he said that he was working up in northern Mexico, and he had gone up there and he had investigated a case of livestock being killed. And he said that it was very weird how these animals, they were just torn apart. And so they thought it was like a jaguar or a puma. Because, Mexico, they have both. And he said, we thought maybe it was a large cat. When they looked at the prints, the cat would not have the claws on the footprints. He said this thing had full-on claws and everything, and it was bipedal. Now, he never saw it. He never saw it or whatever that it was. But when he asked for a description from one of the witnesses, the witness was kind of just like, kind of reluctant, to tell him. And he said, what do you think it is? He says, dude, it looked like a werewolf, hombre lobo. And he was like, well, really? And he was like, yeah. He goes, I don't know any other way to describe it. It's killed all these different animals, And so his grandfather was a believer, in this stuff. And so that's the stories he told him. And this guy told me the stories, it makes you pause and think about it, like not every werewolf or dogman, whatever, is going to be the same. You know what I mean? Like you were talking about that, I think yesterday, Tony, we were having a conversation and you were saying, there's different types. There's all these different types, but you can't say, hey, they're all, it might have been on the live stream.
I think it was
on the live stream we were talking about. Yeah. And you were saying something about how there's different types or whatever. And people were seeing like these ones that look like bears, but they're not bears. These are bear men or werebears or whatever you want to call them. And there's different individuals and they're different subspecies or species or whatever. But I thought it was interesting that his grandfather told him that story, and that his grandfather's dad had said that these things were actually like a hive. They have, like, in their little communities, they're a hive mind.
And thinking about it now, it kind of actually does make sense, seeing as how they use telepathy to communicate, especially since they're showing images. You would, you would immediately recognize if you're being shown images of exactly what attacked you, or like being shown images directly. If that's how they communicate, it would make total sense that you messed with one, they all know about it, because he just has to send that image out saying like, this attacked me, and now everybody knows
what that is.
That thing attacked him. So
20 years? I mean, do you think it was it was a coincidence, or I don't believe in coincidences, but do you think what do you think it was?
Well, we talked about them being able to mark before.
Yeah.
So it could have been some like, I'm marking all of you guys. You just shot me. And, I might not ever get to you. We might never come in contact again, but I'm letting my people know. Oh, so
it's kind of like it's got a wanted poster in their mind.
Yeah. It's like, I'm letting my people know that you mess with me.
Yeah, my people will get in touch with your people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, something that might be even more disturbing, if you think about it, in nature, a hive mind is typically, it's to ensure the survival of a species. It's a survival mechanism, is it not?
It's one of the most successful survival mechanisms in nature.
These werewolf-looking creatures, these are apex predators. I mean, like one of them alone can kill anything in the animal kingdom. Well, let's just say one of them alone can kill pretty much anything in the animal kingdom. Let's say they're at the top of the food chain. So against what are they trying to survive to the extent that
that's not necessarily true, though. That opens up a really cool discussion. Okay, look, I'm gonna say this. You remember Simon the Bull? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Of course, he's famous for having killed a dogman, and the one that he killed was a large male dogman. He killed it, but as well as I do, you've gone to bull riding events. I mean, bulls, what can fight that thing? You know what I mean? Like a 2,000-pound animal.
There's a reason that the bull was so revered just throughout ancient history.
You could run like the people. I got massive respect for the rodeo clowns.
Oh man,
and those guys, and they saved them cowboys, and them cowboys are brave to get on them bulls. Folks, you don't have any idea how bull riding is just so.
It takes so much guts. The entire thing takes guts. I mean, it's just these monsters. That's basically what they are.
And some of the guys they're going to be on a show now. I think on Amazon. I think it's coming out. It's called. Oh gosh, I saw the advertised for it. Ezekiel, the guy that he's an African American kid. We met him. I took a picture with him. I hung out with him a little bit over at Scruggs. He's from the Austin Gamblers.
Yeah, I remember him.
They're going to do a documentary on the Austin Gamblers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's coming out. But it's really crazy though when you look at this bull, and when the Hernandezes and of course the Hutchins were telling us about Simon, they were like, this bull was so bad, so mean, so cantankerous that it had killed another younger bull that it had actually sired. They got into it, and Simon was just a mean animal, and he'd actually, in that episode with the Hernandez Ranch where the one of the brothers had gotten down, had fallen backwards because he was not seeing it, and he turned around and it was there flattened out. That thing was only hiding. It wasn't hiding from them. It was hiding from the bull. So, and the point of this is that if a bull can kill one of them one-on-one, there's also giant hogs that get just ungodly huge. I mean, even though this thing is built for the kill, I mean, there's still even a great white going after a seal is going to try to protect itself, because sea lions can tear its eyes out. I mean, they found great whites with messed up eyes and stuff that, probably a sea lion. So when you think about this, because I was watching the thing about it the other day, there's always something out there that can, like a great white's fear is orcas.
See, if these dogmen wanted to counter, like, let's say a bull or a giant hog.
It's the pack.
Yeah, I mean, it would seem to me that they could do that by organizing themselves into packs, but these things, a hive mind is not the same as a pack.
Well, here's the thing.
And that goes into this.
So, go ahead. What necessitates them organizing into a hive mind? Is it something more terrifying than them?
Too. Go ahead. It doesn't necessarily have to be more terrifying than them. What hunts an apex creature besides another apex creature?
Mm-hmm.
So these dogmen, let's pretend that there's a world full of dogmen, right? They're going to attack each other. How are you going to fight that? What if my tribe of people were so in tune with each other that we just instantly, we all know
it's an advantage.
It's an advantage in that situation, where it's like, if you're dealing with other apex and that's your only competition, then you're gonna have to figure out some other way to make it to where you
look at how chimps are. They don't get along with other groups. Mm-hmm. If you're from one group, they do not coexist with each other at all. Watch Chimp Empire. I just watched one episode of that the other night, and it was like they were going to war, dude. They were killing each other, and they're mean. But when you think about it, it's not just other dogmen that they got to look out for. Now, these things are from the inner earth, which I think this particular case they are.
Yeah.
What else lives within the earth? I mean, hell, everything that we have talked about.
Rakes could live in there.
We're talking about like these big. They call them draconians, like these big giant reptilians. I mean, not just like humanoid ones, but like just these giant reptilians.
Things. Yeah. Because I was going to throw that out there. Go ahead, Tony.
I was going to say, I think after a certain level, every creature just becomes like the apex of we could kill everything. But like everything at that level can kill everything. So then they have to compete with each other. So then that's when you start seeing nature.
Plus, you don't want to get hurt. And it's much easier in the wild. You know, getting hurt could be a death sentence. So, you know, you try to keep from getting hurt. That's why whenever a shark makes a mistake with a seal, that seal could turn and bite its eye or claw its eye or something. And then it's hindered the rest of its life and it could die. So, you know, even being a big bad great white, you still have that and you have orcas to contend with. And there's no like just simple reason. Look at how in tune orcas are with each other. You would think that one of them by themselves could just go out on their own and kill everything.
No, but they stay together. No matter
they stay
what.
together, and because there's got to be something else out there that intimidates to a degree where they don't want to be by themselves. You know what I mean? And we know that pack animals are better at survival, and then hive mind animals are even better.
Can you imagine a pack hive mind animal? That's a terrifying thing because then you have like a bond of a pack, but then you have like that absolute control of a hive man where it's like we're bonded because you
just know what each other's thinking.
We know each other's thinking but we also have that connection with each other where it's like we this is more than just family. This is everything. And
one thing we've left out too is Bigfoot. I mean, Bigfoot are fighting with Dogman all the time. I mean, in fact, we're going to do a show about it pretty soon about just the fighting between these two species. So if you're a dogman, you know, and you're living under the earth, within the earth, and you have your own pack, you have to worry about the other dogman packs, the other types, and then you have to worry about Sasquatch, which is ever, you know, present, you know, they're everywhere. And then you have to worry about humans, you know, and humans can be dangerous too. I mean, we're shooting and doing all kinds of crap. And then you have to worry about the reptilians.
Rakes.
You know,
I mean, there's all the other creatures.
There's a lot of advantages and reasons to you being the hive mind.
Yeah. But that's even just looking at the apex level of it. If we look at it from the opposite view of the prey level, wolves didn't become packs to protect them. It's like that's a factor of it, but they also did it to make it easier to hunt.
To hunt, yeah.
Yeah. So like you could use it in that same way where it's like, oh, if we were a hive mind, hunting would become so much easier. So that could be how they evolved into it that way too.
If these things really are truly demonic, it would make a lot of sense that they're a hive mind because that's what we are legion, or legion for we are many. That's what that means.
And one thing I know, like no matter how crazy the supernatural is, you're always going to be surprised by nature. Mother Nature is just as wild as the supernatural. And if you don't believe me, look up the Moonjack deer. It's an MUNJAC deer. These special deers have holes. They look like holes in their face, and they flare out and they move. And what they are, they actually collect scents. And it's one of the wildest things you ever see because it looks like a cut up deer, and these holes, they flare out this fleshy looking substance, and it goes back in, flares out, and it looks like something you'd see in Avatar. It's one of the wildest creatures I've ever seen. That's just natural. That's nature. So you can imagine what kind of wild stuff the unnature can bring together.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, folks, leave us your thoughts in the comments section. Try to keep it clean and don't be snarky and mean. And we love you all. Thank you for tuning in. Paranormal Roundtable for me, Anthony, Tony, everybody. I want to say good night.
Thank you guys. Appreciate you guys joining us.
Thank you and good night.
Good night.